We are in Albuquerque, New Mexico right now. Before we begin the video, I'd just like to say rest in peace to Albuquerque's most famous resident, Mr. Walter White. Gone but not forgotten. This is my awesome host. I've been here in his house last night and I'll be here tonight. We're not shooting it on the couch because it's actually a loft and there's no light, so we're outside. This is Ernesto, and this is, would you like to introduce our other guest?
Yeah, this is JJ. I don't know how wide your angle,
Oh yeah,
wide your lens is.
oh yeah,
but
you're in it.
she's in the shot now.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So you have quite an interesting story. You're from where?
So I'm from just outside New York City, about 30 minutes from Manhattan, maybe 45. And I came out here in summer of 2015 on a filmmaking fellowship, teaching and making films out in the Navajo Nation on the New Mexico side.
And you lived out there, right?
I did, yeah, for a year.
For a year. And tell us about what it was like living out there. How many people? What was the situation?
So the Navajo Nation spans 4 states, and it's like 110. It's called chapters. They're almost like towns. And I was in one called Pueblo Pintado, which is situated between Chaco Canyon and Cuba, New Mexico. And there were probably like 150 residents in the area. But students were bussed in from different chapters all around the surrounding area. There were probably 100 students in the high school where I taught at, and I taught about 65 of them.
And what subjects did you teach?
I only taught filmmaking.
Oh, there was a filmmaking class?
So
That's
this
interesting.
program that I worked with, Filmmakers Without Borders, places art educators and filmmakers, different sites all around the world. This was the first North American program, and so the idea is placing an art educator or a filmmaker in a different site and teaching filmmaking while also being given creative assignments. Like we had to deliver 5 photographs a week, and we had to work on some vignettes and short films and stuff like that. Yeah.
So, where did you live out there?
I lived originally on the on-campus housing at the high school for several months, and then eventually moved in with a member of the community down the road, maybe 2 minutes down the road, and yeah, I feel like my cultural immersion picked up more when I moved in with someone in the community.
So, tell us about your backyard. Story.
So yeah, the backyard at the teacher housing had several rattlesnakes in the backyard. You just throw like a rock back there because the grass was really tall. You'd hear all this rattling, and so I think it was just because it was a very isolated area, and it was quiet most of the day. The rattlesnakes felt more inclined to hang out around there, even though they're not usually around populated areas. And someone told me the school was built on a rattlesnake pit. I don't know if 100% that's true, but the volume of snakes would suggest that it's worth entertaining the thought.
So what would the principal do every day? Was it every day? Every week?
No, not every day. It's just that there was so
Once
many
a month?
rattlesnakes to deal with, so you had to like take care of a few of them every once in a while because they would get everywhere.
And for the Navajo people, they have an interesting thing with snakes, right?
Well, as far as I know, most people on the Navajo Nation don't really approach snakes, and I don't really know too much story behind the superstition, but yeah.
Yeah, so the principal was white, right? And tell us about the demographics of the teachers at the school.
Well, most teachers were brought in from outside. I know that Teach for America was there when I was there. There were about 3 Teach for America instructors, and everybody's from anywhere else in the United States. I think maybe Massachusetts, Detroit, and Washington. Yeah.
But now Teach for America is not
GG.
there anymore. So you told me that a number of the teachers now are from the Philippines?
I believe so.
Mhm.
I know that one teacher was from the Philippines when I was there last year. She was our math teacher, and then I think there's a few more now. But I've only been back about twice, so I don't really know like the whole faculty situation right now.
Yeah, sure. So, if you wanted to go to the grocery store and pick up some groceries, how far did you have to go?
You usually had to go to a nearby town called Grants, which I think might have been like 50 miles, or if you wanted more options, I guess you'd go to Albuquerque, which is about 70 miles. And I actually didn't have a car for the first, I want to say, month and a half to 2 months. So
You had to ride a horse.
no, well, what happened was the first day I landed in Albuquerque, I bought like a month's worth of bread and peanut butter because I was just so dazed from the trip and just like not feeling well, and so I wasn't thinking it through very well. So I lived off of peanut butter and bread pretty much for maybe a month.
Not, was it peanut butter and fry bread?
No, it wasn't fry bread. No. I actually didn't get to try fry bread until like maybe halfway through my year or something like that. And then got more into it later. But like, yeah, I was just sort of like living off of peanut butter and bread in the beginning, and when I got my car out here, my friends very graciously drove it out from New York across the country, and so yeah.
If you had to guess, how many people lived in a 40 square mile radius around where you were living? How many do you think?
I don't know. 40 miles would probably be. There's a nearby chapter called Whitehorse. I don't know how many people live there, but it's definitely only in the hundreds, I would say.
When you came back to Albuquerque,
Yeah.
it was a pretty tough experience.
Well, less so Albuquerque, more so going back to visit family in New York over like holidays and that sort of thing. People always think that coming from New York to the Navajo Nation was the adjustment. For me, it more was adapting to that area and then coming back into a place like New York. There was so much more information to deal with, so many sounds, so many people, and just the buildings and everything.
Not enough rattlesnakes.
Not enough rattlesnakes. And I was just silent. I didn't even know how to respond to being back in Manhattan.
How long do you think you were silent for?
Like a full day probably. And slowly adjusted, but I noticed my personality shifting a little bit, coming back into busier, more populated areas, and just kind of being less anxious and just kind of having a slower pace, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've nearly reached my full obnoxious talking to myself again.
So you told me that the people who lived on the res many of them were just a couple generations removed from things like the grocery store, cars, and you were telling me how that affected their lives.
Well, yeah. So I mean, like, I think one of the major issues out there. I mean, there's so many different kinds of underserved communities in the world, and Filmmakers Without Borders definitely operates in a lot of different communities where the population may be very large and things may be bustling, and it's certainly underserved in many ways. But in the Navajo Nation, from what I could tell, access was a major factor for a lot of people. So that just didn't mean food; it meant opportunity for work. It meant access to healthcare and things like that. You know, it's a very spread out place. I think I remember looking up. It's like something like 27,000 square miles, and so it's like a small European country right in the middle of America.
Oh, not even a small European country.
Right.
I think more like an average-sized European country.
Yeah,
It's pretty small.
I think it's comparable to Scotland. I think in size. Yeah.
Yeah, and Scotland's bigger than probably half of the countries in Europe.
Right.
So previously, just a short while previously, most of the people there were self-reliant. They were growing their own food, and now society has shifted to somewhat of a state of dependence upon grocery stores, upon government assistance, and the lifestyle has changed. What issues has that created, and how has the people in the community like reacted to that?
That's tough for me to say. I don't know. You probably have to ask somebody who's actually living through that experience. But I can give you my observations.
Oh, sure. That's all anybody can give.
My observations are that I feel like there's not enough done to recognize that everybody who lives in the United States on or off reservations is being subject to the realities of a market economy. So if there's scarcity of jobs, there's limitation of access to essentials like food, you're creating a lot of walls for people. And anybody who's subjected to a situation like that needs a better alternative, It's one thing to make the argument for availability of jobs in denser populated areas in major cities in America, but when you're living somewhere where life and geography has kind of been structured in a certain way for very many years, and then there's these standards of a market economy imposed on people, there's got to be some sort of solution in place so people can get access to basic needs and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So how do the people out there support themselves?
It varies. Some people have ranches. Some people are on federal assistance. Some people have construction jobs, or they travel great distances to go to more highly populated areas to work. And some people leave the reservation to find careers in education, that sort of thing.
You were telling me about some of the mega commutes that people are doing. So you had students that were going an hour one way to school.
So one of the nearby communities is called Torreon, and I've done that drive a whole bunch, and it's easily 45 minutes to an hour if you're on a bus that's not driving what I'm driving on there, which is like fast. It's a much longer commute, and I just, I'd walk into school every day, and I wouldn't necessarily cut anybody a break in terms of the standards for their education or anything like that, but I couldn't help but think about how angsty I was as a teenager and how I used to complain about things. And I lived 10 minutes from my high school, and some of these kids are doing like a professional commute to high school every day, and it's just amazing that they're there and they're working and they're present. And if they're ever not, or it's kind of a slower day, I don't know what I would have been like at 15 having to deal with something like that.
But you told me that of all the students, only one seemed to be like not into the situation, like not liking his status in life.
Well, yeah, I think you're gonna run into that in many places. There's lots of folks that are very traditional because that's in their family, and then there are some folks that are not, and that rejection can be sort of like something you're dealing with because you're young and you're trying to find your own identity and all that. But yeah.
Because I remember in my high school, I'd say a quarter of the kids were angsty and didn't like the high school. I went to a very nice high school, but like I'd say a quarter didn't like it. But when I asked you if there was this, I just thought maybe half the kids wouldn't like it. But then you said that there was only one guy who seemed to who told you that he didn't like his situation.
Yeah, but like I said, I think that's just sort of like, it's also 100 students, so that if you look at a school that's got 3,000 kids, that number in a relative sense is going to be greater in terms of how many individuals you're talking about. But yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the preferred name for the Navajo people, because Navajo is a Spanish word.
As far as I know, yes.
Well, yeah, we'll just say it is. It sounds like it.
It sounds to me like
that's
a Spanish
plausible.
word, yeah.
But their preferred name for themselves is.
Well, so they're the actual name is Diné. The language is Dinebizot, which is of the Athabascan language group, and so yeah, the people are Diné. Some people are fine with Navajo. Some people prefer Diné. I just say Diné as a default. It's just because I know that that's. I've never heard anyone saying they don't want to be called Diné.
Yes. So what is their connection to the former Mount McKinley?
Oh, you'd have to ask Ron about that. I can't really talk about that. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just going to repeat what I heard last night. Last night we had a visitor, Ron. He was in town for the. What was he in town for?
Gathering of Nations, which is, if not the world's largest, one of the world's largest powwows.
Yeah. How many people do you think were there?
I don't know in terms of people. I know that it typically has as many as 2,000 or more dancers. And the grand entry usually consists of all of those dancers on the floor at once, which is a pretty incredible thing to see.
So Ron told us last night he's in his 50s, his 60s. His family are ranchers and lawyers, but he's the black sheep, as he told us. He's the artist. And he told us that Mount Denali, that's the correct name, right? Mount Denali?
I think he said.
Yeah, so Mount McKinley, former Mount McKinley in Alaska was renamed back to its original indigenous name. And so he told us that the Mount Denali comes from Dene, and the reason for that is that the Dene came to here in the Southwest from up north. So they were, they were the original illegal immigrants stealing jobs from all the hardworking Pueblo Indians who were here a little bit longer. So there's quite a rich history. I've heard that many indigenous groups have names that were imposed upon them or given them by the French, by the British, by the Spanish that actually have roots in things like thief and enemy. So there's an interesting history with a lot of the names. As you might have heard, there's a lot of dogs barking around us.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it got picked up on the mic. So that probably leads into New Mexico is one of the poorest states in the United States. And there comes some issues along with that, poverty.
Well, I mean, I can't really speak on that. It's not really something I'm an expert in. I don't really know enough about.
Well, just how you've observed it and how it's affected you, if at all.
I mean, I've just noticed in Albuquerque that there's a definitely noticeable homeless population, but I mean that's the extent of the observations that I can make, really.
So New Mexico used to have, it seems to be getting better, a bit of a drug problem relative.
Well, from what I've been told, there has been one. So yeah, I don't know.
No worries.
Yeah.
You're working on a film project right now, a feature film project.
Sorry, JJ's being a little. She's noticing all the dogs around us.
So too many dogs.
Yeah.
Tell us about the feature film project and the inspiration behind it.
So last summer, JJ. Okay, sorry. Last summer, JJ. Okay. Last summer, I started developing a concept for a Western, and it's now titled Six and Bisty. Bisty is reference to um, an area called Bisty Badlands
Uh-huh.
in New Mexico, and it's in the Navajo Nation. And the concept is basically the film is from the indigenous perspective, so um, that's sort of where it ends for me creatively. I've I've brought on various indigenous artists to help me create this project, and they've crafted narratives to not just to provide depth and accuracy for for indigenous characters in something like a Western, but put them at the forefront. So that's exactly why I've gotten to a point where I'm kind of hands off with the creative direction. I have a general idea and a story, and I've been working with different artists to populate that story with their points of view,
Uh-huh.
and making sure that all those points of view fit into one cohesive film.
So contrast your story with popular Hollywood films that people probably know, like The Revenant or Dances with Wolves.
Well,
How's it different?
one common complaint I've heard among indigenous film critics and audience members is that while there might be a new push to better represent indigenous characters in terms of accuracy and authenticity, there's still a very well composed background to Hollywood heroes, and it's being heavily driven by the tropes of Hollywood heroes. And so the film is basically trying to just flip that around. So the folks that are the well-composed background and are the well-composed foreground, and the two non-indigenous characters in the film are Civil War veterans who are going across the Navajo Nation to collect the gold from a tontine. Tontine is sort of like a blood contract, or it's an arrangement that soldiers will make during war if it seems like they're not going to, let me know if I'm trailing off. Yeah. But essentially the whole idea is just flipping the perspective. So it's not just about accuracy and authenticity. It's about I mean, forget social justice for a second. Forget like forget any preachy motivations or themes. It's just really interesting and exciting to find new points of view that you don't get to see in films. And because this is a no-budget guerrilla film, we don't really have to answer to anybody. We're not beholden to anybody. We're not worried about marketability. We're just trying to say something new, and we're just trying to be bold.
So you've heard it here. Burn your copy of Dances with Wolves. Take your copy of The Revenant, break it in half.
No. Watch them, enjoy them.
After you watch them, do that.
They're still enjoyable films, but it's also valuable to recognize that this really can't be the extent of how we can explore new kinds of characters and explore and understand and educate non-indigenous people like me, like you, to experiences that we don't really know about.
So tell us one thing, coming from New York, coming out here, living on the res. Tell me one thing that you really appreciated about the Navajo people and that perhaps we could learn from. And then tell me one thing about the Navajo that just really annoys you. And if you could wave a magic wand, you would.
I won't answer that second question. I'm sorry. I don't think there really is anything. I can't really think of anything. I mean, what was the first question again?
The thing that is admirable about them.
That is admirable. I would say I can speak specifically about my students at Sagay High School in Pueblo Pintado, New Mexico. That I am always inspired and impressed by their creative drive. They didn't have any sort of artistic outlet in school, when the program came in and I saw how much they brought to the course. It wasn't about a group of students that didn't have any sort of creative interest or drive. I found a bunch of students that were just sort of like clamoring for an opportunity to make use of talents and skills they already had. So I would say something I admire about them in particular is their creativity and their talent and their skill and their dedication to art.
Speaking of that, what's your educational background? Your college?
I took one film class in college, but I learned by doing. I've been shooting since I was 8 years old.
What did you major in?
And majored in history, double minored in women's studies and Middle Eastern studies, and I guess those have informed my creativity. They're not like formal training in creativity.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And one last question. Hopefully you can still see us. I don't know.
It should auto adjust, right? Unless you've got some sort of.
We'll see what happens. The sun has set over the hills to the west. Beautiful red sunset. Albuquerque is a beautiful
We
place.
just do a slideshow of New Mexico, show photos on Instagram with our audio.
It's a really truly it's a beautiful place. I'm surprised. The Land of Enchantment. That's what
Yeah.
they call it. So one last question.
Yeah.
How did you hear about couch surfing, and what's your experience with it?
I don't remember how I heard about it. I remember joining many years ago and never doing a thing with it. And then when I realized 70 miles is a really long drive to get milk and eggs and bread, that I probably needed a place to crash occasionally. So I kind of took up couch surfing when I was going to Albuquerque or Santa Fe to get supplies or go to the doctor or whatever. And it would be nice to not do that drive back and forth in one day. So I started couch surfing as just a sort of means to, it was on a living stipend, so I couldn't just like go in hotels every weekend. And I didn't know anybody, so couch surfing seemed a great way to meet people, not have to pay for a place to stay every time I needed to go into town. And now that I'm in Albuquerque, just trying to pay it forward and host people.
When you've been paying it forward, have there been any weird experiences, or just all good?
I personally haven't had any weird experiences. I've heard of them, but I personally haven't had any issues.
And how many people have you hosted?
Maybe like 8 so far.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Albuquerque, New Mexico, the Land of Enchantment. It's a beautiful place. It's an interesting place. I've been to many places in the United States, and this is definitely one of the most unique. And if there is diversity to be found in the United States, New Mexico is one of the first places to go searching for it.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
Great.
And
Thank
it was
you.
a lot of fun.
Yeah. Absolutely.